We were discussing the article on ambiguity avoidance, and about the same we will begin the article. Ambiguity avoidance. By all accounts, linguistic communication involves a syntactic representation of some kind, transmitted from producer to perceiver via a sequence of words. For this process to occur successfully, the syntactic structure must be inferable from the words. There should be no ambiguity in the sentence formation. That's the paragraph which we had discussed. The idea of ambiguity avoidance has received only occasional attention in studies of syntax, and he quotes a study called Beaver. And he says, Beaver suggested that the requirement of a relative pronoun, who, what, how, Beaver suggested that the requirement of a relative pronoun in English subject-relative clauses may be due to the fact that such clauses would often be ambiguous without the relative pronoun who, which, the relative pronoun who and which. The man hired me was very tall. This is the example. This is without the relative pronoun. With the relative pronoun, it becomes the man who hired me was very tall. You get the difference? So relative pronouns are often required for avoidance of syntactical ambiguity in statements. In object relative clauses, where the relative pronoun is optional, this ambiguity does not arise. Okay. Again, when the object is in the subject position, when it is not, object relative clauses, as in clauses where the object is placed in the beginning and the action doing noun, which is I, is placed later, there placing the relative pronoun is optional. Look at this confusing statement. The man I hired was very tall. Now this is an objective relative clause. Why? What is the action? Hired. Who is doing the action? I. So is I in the subject position? No. Who is in the subject position? The man. The man I hired is very tall is a complete statement. Even if you add to it the man whom I hired was very tall, the sentence does not become clearer. Whereas in the earlier case, the man hired me was very tall is an incomplete syntactical sentence. The man who hired me was very tall is a complete sentence with no syntactical ambiguity. So when the subject or when the sentence is in the object relative clause, then adding a relative pronoun is not that important. Is that clear? Because I cannot get a response from you, I'm hoping that it is clear. Rewind and go through the example once again that I have given you for you to understand what I am meaning to say. There are certain statements here: subject, object, relative pronouns, who, which. Similar reasoning, Beaver suggested, might account for the fact that a complementizer is required. A complementizer is required preceding a clause in subject position. Without one, there is again a danger of interpreting it as the main clause. Complementizer are words, complementary words are words that give further additional definition of the subject. For example, is the word complementizer is that. Look at the example. John is sick is quite evident. Now this is syntactically ambiguous. That John is sick is quite evident. That is required to specify the subject position of John firmly in the sentence, and therefore that becomes a complementizer. that John is sick, this very John is sick, and that he is sick. So the emphasis on that John is very important for the avoidance of any and every kind of syntactical ambiguity. We should note that the potential ambiguity arising from these examples, assuming that they were syntactically allowed, would only be temporary. The correct analysis would eventually be clear. What is at issue then is not the ambiguity of the complete sentence, but a local ambiguity or garden path effect that might temporarily impede proceedings. Why is it very important that all of these syntactical ambiguities be removed? The author says that make no mistake, if the sentence, even the syntactically ambiguous sentence, John is sick is quite evident without the complementizer. We have not used that. That John is sick is quite evident. Even if we say John is sick is quite evident, you might not get the meaning of the sentence in the first reading. Eventual reading of the statement might deliver the complete, clear syntactical meaning of the sentence. But what is lost is the garden part. So it's the garden part lost. It's the immediate effect of not understanding the meaning of the sentence, thus making the sentence syntactically ambiguous. That is at stake here. In a single reading of the sentence, you do not get its meaning quite clearly. Therefore, the sentence is syntactically ambiguous. How is it important to budding advocates? Does everybody have the time to go through your write-up more than once? Do judges have the time? Do you have the time to go through somebody else's write-up, legal writing more than once? So it is absolutely imperative then that all kinds of syntactical ambiguity be removed from the statement. That the statement, what should be your aim? Very simply put, the aim of syntactical clarity is that the sentence is understood in the very first mode of reading, and further reading of the statement is not required. So in this case, now in these examples that I have given you, the ambiguity is something that is called local ambiguity. That is, it is so localized in the concept, and it is of such small value that it does not change the meaning of the sentence completely, or does not show any oppositional meaning. Therefore, it's a local ambiguity, and it can be corrected if the sentence is itself read once or twice. The ambiguous sentence. Okay. Now there is another writer called Hankamer who proposes that certain constructions may be prohibited on the grounds that they would routinely cause ambiguities. So in this article we are going to talk about those routine habits and sentence formations of ours which hamper the clarity of the sentence the moment we have read it. Hankamer focuses particularly on gapped constructions. For example, you cannot say Max gave Sally a nickel and Harvey a dime, meaning that Harvey gave Sally a dime. The reason, according to Hankamer, is that this sentence is open to another interpretation, that Max gave Harvey a dime. These observations, as well as others, is called impermissible ambiguity constraint. Constructions that would lead to ambiguities or misanalysis on every occurrence. Alright, let's see the sentence again. Max gave Sally a nickel and Harvey a dime. This sentence can have two meanings. Max gave Sally a nickel, Max gave Harvey a dime. Or Max gave Sally a nickel and Harvey gave a dime. To whom? To either Max or Sally. Now the sentence is so ambiguous. Who does the action? On whom does the action rest? Further action goes to whom? All these parts are so ambiguous And such sentences need to be clarified. Such sentences by Hankimer are called by the word impermissible ambiguity constraint, because these are constructions that lead to ambiguities or misanalysis on every stage and are thus supposed to be prohibited. So today the new word that you have learned is impermissible ambiguity constraint.